Greetings and welcome back. It's your host, Gabe Morales. First of all, let me give our viewers my sincere gratitude for helping me make this channel a great success. When I first started it, just over 4 years ago, I didn't have a clue what I was doing. I learned the hard way. I have never taken a YouTube class, although I have occasionally peeped an online tutorial if I get stuck on something. I am a tech dinosaur, as I was born in 1960. When I was growing up, I learned on a chalkboard. Anybody remember those? Currently, I have almost 2.5 million views with over 20,000 loyal subscribers and will soon be teaching a YouTube class to a large number of law enforcement and non-law enforcement attendees in Califas. Wish me luck. Today I'm going to cover the California Correctional Institution at Tehachapi, which is located about 100 miles north of Los Angeles in the mountains of the Mojave Desert in Kern County. It is very cold in the winter and very hot in the summer. The facility originally opened as the California Institution for Women and appeared in the 1940s films The Maltese Falcon and Double Indemnity. A serious 1952 earthquake closed the facility, as I explained in my last video. In 1954, CCI reopened as a male institution. And in 1985 and 86, the state built two new maximum security housing units, sometimes called the White Elephant, that were considered state-of-the-art at the time and housed many prison gang members, especially before Corcoran opened in 1988 and Pelican Bay in 1989. When it first opened, level 4A and 4B inmates were housed there, with units 1 through 4 being GP, units 5 through 7 being SHU, and 8 was used as administrative segregation. I believe that many of the level 4 inmates were later shipped to Calipatria, and many of the yards at CCI were made sensitive needs yards, or SNY. Tehachapi could be a very dangerous place for inmates as well as staff to work. In the year 2002, a guard was stabbed several times in the chest by two inmates, but recovered from his injuries. In April 2005, two Tehachapi guards were injured by a prisoner using an inmate-manufactured weapon, but both recovered. In August 2017, two male sergeants and a male officer were treated for lacerations, stab wounds, and puncture wounds, and a fourth officer, a woman, suffered unknown injuries. All were taken to the hospital and survived their injuries. It is my understanding that the inmates involved in that attack were affiliated with Sureños. As a warning to convicts of possible things to come, R&R, or the reception area of the prison there, had a poster of a cat in the middle of a pack of dogs that said, "Feeling out of place?" CCI was a new style prison experiment, so it had a lot of blind spots, like many of the old joints that I've spoke of previously in other videos. So a lot of guys got hit, and the gunners never saw it, or if they did, they let it happen anyway. I worked in corrections for over 30 years, so I'm well aware that there are many liars, manipulators, J-cats, mentally ill for you non-CDC experienced listeners, but sometimes they will tell the truth. The CCI had a reputation for being very brutal, not just convict on convict, but by the guards. I heard that since the SHU opened there in the mid-1980s, there were like over a dozen vatos killed by the COs, even more than Corcoran or Pelican Bay combined from the gladiator fight days of the 1990s. Some say that there was a green wall at CCI before it was even called that and more well known at Corcoran and Pelican Bay. Others say that there is no green wall and that that is all fiction and bullshit. Well, alls I can tell you is I saw some very corrupt and abusive officers at New Folsom. But to be clear, they were in the minority, were always very careful to cover their tracks. There is no one size fits all for every situation and excessive force allegations. Prison gangs have long been present at CCI. On October 19, 1972, West Familia member Leonard Yogi Bear Arias, who was part of the Macho program there, was killed by the entrance of dorm number 8 by Meros David Loco Gallegos, Sal Tani Vargas, and Robert Biggs Mata. Arias had been hit earlier that year at San Quentin, and the Mafia decided to finish him off. All three hitters were charged, tried, convicted, and received life sentences. As I recall, much of the NF leadership was housed at CCI in the mid-1980s when it first opened. I believe that Corny Tristan and Pinky Hernandez were moved from Folsom 4A to the SHU there when it first opened, before being transferred out to Corcoran in 88 and Pelican Bay in 89. I believe the decision was made around then when they were housed at CCI on what used to be La Mesa, but a name change was given as being the Overall Governing Body, or OGB, a title that I still believe exists. So there really has been no Mesa for 40 years, even though I hear some people still using that term. It is my opinion that these guys often communicate between themselves better than we do. Not all prison gang leaders were held at the then new Tehachapi SHU, but they still got their messages across. For instance, we had James Tibbs Morado at New Folsom Beat Facility, and per their constitution, these guys are not supposed to make decisions unilaterally, as they may have done during the days of Babo that were quickly stamped by Death Row Joe. It was at this time we noticed a lot of Norteños growing Genghis Khan style ponytails near the top of their heads, and the Sureños were shaving their heads bald. We found out that Tibbs had directed Nuestra Raza / Northern Structure to do this to more easily identify themselves on the yards, and Sureños were doing their style thing in return. You have to remember the Norteños and Sureños movements were still relatively young back then and have evolved ever since. One of the main players who signed off on the XIV bonds when he was at DVI, Michael Monososa, Bubba's brother, was housed at CCI in the 1980s through 1994 until he decided to drop out, was transferred to Corcoran, transferred to SADF, and committed suicide in March 2009. There were many in West Sarasa Northern Structure housed at CCI over the years, as well, until that organization was deemed to be out of control and was abolished. But some were left to remain as NSOLs under a new XIV bonds format. This was later verified as described in Johnny Ray's book, Yard Down, when in November 2014 there was another filter that was intercepted that talked about in honoring our commitment to the Norteño movement and in celebration of this 30-year anniversary, 1984 to 2014, referring to the Nuestra Raza, we are at our collective fists in profound honor and respects to all Norteños in our Norteño struggle. Went on to say that the Northerner label will no longer be used as an identifier with our struggle. All beneath our banner and shield will be known as Norteños. The sole destination for those who desire a closer commitment to the struggle will be known as Norteño Soldados, also known as NSOLs. As I stated many times previously, while the NF obviously felt that many NR/NS were operating as renegades, when the NF sent out the filter in 1997 squashing that fast-growing movement, it is my professional opinion that it added to the growth of the Northern Riders and New Flowers. Just two among many PC gangs that I will address more here shortly. Prison gangs will often appoint somebody in charge of a facility for their gang when a keyholder leaves. And when a keyholder leaves, they will often give the llaves to a senior member or a well-respected member. For instance, John Wicked Gaitan was the overall authority or CCI regimental commander in 2012, and underneath him were unit housing section leaders James Turlo Gabat, David Joker Arzate, and Jacinto Shorty Ruelas. Miami also had a presence at CCI, especially before Corcoran and Pelican Bay opened. As I mentioned in my Folsom video, Mexican Mafia shot callers Nico Velasquez and Kilroy Roybal were hit at CCI by a then fairly young Gabriel Sleepy Huerta. Nico was killed, and Kilroy almost killed, soon dropped out and joined Victory Outreach. I understand that when Mexican Mafia vet Peanut Butter Ruiz from Oyomata was housed in the SHU there, he ran a very tight ship. He was a major figure in La M since the 1960s, was released in the year 2014, fled parole, and died in Baja in June of 2016. I believe that Toto Lopez from Santa Paula was also housed there. He is presently housed at Kern Valley State Prison. Alfred Chato Ortega from Laverne, just north of Pomona, was housed at CCI in the year 2016. Some Aryan Brotherhood and former Aryan Brotherhood, Nazi lowriders, and P9 have also been housed at CCI over the years. I believe that Christopher Bakken from Orange County was housed there around 1998. There's some good information on him in Brian Perry's book, Eye of the Devil. Dwayne Grumpy Christensen, who I mentioned in my Folsom video as killing and gutting a guy for drugs that were hidden inside of his body, was also housed at CCI in the mid-1980s. Aryan Brotherhood heavyweights Ricky Terplinger, Eddie Burnett, and Danny Troxel were all housed there in 1987 when they killed a former AB who was in bad standing named Donald Rodent Leach. Leach was originally from the state of Oregon and was also a member of the Nazi-like AB support group, the United White People's Party. Del Desperado Britches, also a United White People's Party member, was housed there around 1985 to 87. When he was housed later at Pelican Bay, his cellie was one of the slickest AB hitmen of all time, Paul Cornfred Schneider, who I dealt with at New Folsom B Facility 1 building, as well as A Facility 6 block, Bedrock. Both were mentioned in the infamous Dogs of War trial, where a lacrosse player, Diane Whipple, was mauled to death by dogs that Bretches and Schneider were planning to breed to sell to drug dealers. Dogs were cared for by their lawyers, who were charged, put on trial, and convicted in that case. Aryan Brotherhood member and cop killer Robert Scully was housed at CCI in 1987. He was then later transferred to Pelican Bay, paroled in 1994, got a parole violation for possession of a firearm, then paroled again in March of 1995 when he was picked up by Cornfred's girlfriend, Brenda Moore, before he killed Sonoma County Sheriff's Deputy Frank Trejo, as explained in my San Quentin video. A Black Guerrilla family member named Rex Chappelle, who had at New Folsom, was housed at CCI in 2011. And Lawrence Old Man Ascari Woodard, mentioned in the homicide of San Quentin, Sergeant Hal Birchfield in my previous video, was housed there in 2015. I remember when I was first accepted as a feature corrections officer by CDC, and I was offered to work at the California Training Facility in Soledad, which I viewed as a fairly expensive to live area, and Tehachapi. But having spent 2 years in the Mojave Desert when I was in the Marine Corps, I wasn't fond of that offer either. As you know, I then took my third choice and signed on and worked at New Folsom from 1987 to 93. I helped open up the facility, and C Yard opened first, which was considered to be a soft yard. Then B Facility Hard Yard opened up. And when A Facility first opened, it was split. The big side was the very first all protected custody yard within the department, as far as I know. And the small side was Security Housing Unit, as well as E5, where I worked, being the Violence Control Unit. But PC yards are no joke, and sometimes can be even more dangerous, as people want to protect themselves or prove themselves. And many join sensitive needs yards gangs, also sometimes called dropout or DO gangs. It is my understanding that in later years, Tehachapi became known as an SNY facility. That does not mean it was not dangerous. In fact, many of the deaths in custody in recent years have been on sensitive needs yards. Please refer to my California Prison Politics and Dropout Gangs video if you're not familiar with SNY gangs.
I do understand that CDC has tried to reintegrate yards, and that includes Sapatistas and another group I'll talk about here in just a minute, the Pesetas, the 2-5s. I will only put out what the media put out about the August 11th, 2022 incident at Tehachapi. It said, quote, prison officials said 6 inmates were hurt after a riot broke out Thursday morning at California Correctional Institution at Tehachapi. A California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation spokesman told 17 News the riot broke out in one of the prison yards just after 10:30 a.m. Thursday. Officials said correctional officers used chemical agents and less lethal foam rounds to stop the riot. Several makeshift weapons were found at the scene, according to CDCR. 6 inmates were taken to outside hospitals for treatment, and no CDC staff were hurt in the riot. So outside of that, all I will say is that 2 individuals died, and at least one of the victims almost died. But it said that they started in about 2013, very secretively. Supposedly, when they first came out, the 2-5s, Sapatistas, and Northern Riders all got along. But then, I understand in 2014, they killed a Peseta, and it's been on with the Pesetas ever since. And they had a few other disturbances, including another homicide. Sapatistas can include inmates from both Northern and Southern California. In fact, the founder was supposedly from Stockton, but I heard was later killed for his actions. I heard that another individual actually was from Happy Town, Pomona, and that they will sometimes call themselves Soldados de la Raza, as well as the rebels, against Nuestra Familia and Mexican Mafia oppression. They have no written rules or constitution, or supposedly any leaders, but they do have a philosophy, and here's one such take. We as Zapatista rebels operate on a no-hands policy, meaning we are to hit any adversaries. It goes on to say we are the alpha dogs. We balance the scales to do what's right. Never compromise. We're soldados with heart and huevos, homie, straight up. So basically, your two fives, your pesetas, are bigger than the Zapatistas, but the Zapatistas say they're badder.
November 2023, there was a disturbance at the facility when inmate David Moreno was attacked by two other prisoners and killed. In May of 2025, approximately 100 incarcerated persons were involved in a riot. I understand in this one it was blacks versus Mexicans on the 50-50 yard, and that 11 weapons were found. An attempted murder occurred at CCI of rapper Tory Lanez, whose legal name is Daystar Peterson, who was brutally stabbed 14 times by an inmate inside the maximum security part of the prison May 12, 2025. Previously, in December 2022, Lanez was convicted of 3 felonies: assault with a semi-automatic firearm, having a loaded, unregistered firearm in a vehicle, and discharging a firearm with gross negligence against well-known female rapper Megan Thee Stallion, real name Megan Pete. She had been managed by Jay-Z's Roc Nation and has recently alleged that Lanez was still harassing her from prison through his contacts. And in January of this year, a judge issued a protective order against Lanez through the year 2030, ordering him to stop any such harassment or other contact with Megan Thee Stallion. In the attack to CCI, the suspect was named as Santino Casio, who himself had been convicted back in 2003 for the shotgun murder of his then 13-year-old girlfriend. Supposedly, this particular incident was over another girl. Casio had previously been identified as being affiliated with Sureños out of Reseda, California, although many people point out that you can no longer be considered a Southsider if you are functioning on a PC yard. Understand that 3 more inmates were critically wounded at the level 4 part of CCI just a couple months ago, and that 6 suspects were gaffled up and taken to SEG pending an investigation. Let me know if you know about more details about that incident. And just a few days ago, on August 3rd, 2025, there was allegedly another incident that didn't get any press coverage. Supposedly, that incident is still under investigation. The state of California has begun closing CCI shoes, starting with Facility D. Politicians state that crime in the state has drastically gone down, less need for prisons. But as I've stated in previous videos, that claim can be debated, as stats don't always tell the true story. It's probably a stronger argument that the state of California just wants to better balance their budget. But many point out that Facility D in particular had a lot of rehabilitation programs to improve lives, which is allegedly part of the mission and goals of the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation. Yes, I know many times I have some very negative and disturbing content on my shows, but I usually try to end them with something positive to state. David Scott Milton was an author who ran a writer's workshop at the institution from the years 1991 to 2004. Let me know if you participated in any of those classes. When I worked in classification at the Regional Justice Center in Kent, Washington, we had a program that often referred inmates to whereby they would write journals about their lives, and I strongly believe that doing so is great therapy. I have learned from others for my own writing and have assisted both former offenders and non-offenders to write books and articles, as I enjoy helping others do that. Anyways, before I end, I want to give a shout out to my brother and former CDC Lieutenant Hector Bravo, who has faced a lot of harassment by some for his expose stories, in particular from CDC brass. Some of his main goals are to expose corruption wherever it exists, in particular policies that place inmates, staff, and the general public at risk. I hope you consider subscribing and support his new worthy efforts on his website, The Hector Bravo Show, which can be accessed at www.hectorbravoshow.com. Well, that's all for now. Until next time, this is Gabe Morales signing off for Gangsters, Cops, and Politicians.